To have you guys with me here today. I invite you to jump on into the conversation. We're going to have a pretty interesting conversation. I've got a gentleman who is, I've been kind of looking forward to this one. I mean, I look forward to a lot of them, let's be honest, but this one's one that I've been kind of waiting on for a while. His name is Charles Mizrahi, and he comes from an investment background. And we'll touch on a little bit. I have some personal questions for him. I'm just going to take advantage of his presence and ask him a couple of personal questions on the financial side. The Alpha Investor is his publication for those of you who are interested. But he also has a podcast called The Charles Mizrahi Show, and we'll show you how to see that. But there's a topic that he is very interested in that I am very interested in, and that is the rise in America, at least my perception is that it's on the rise, we'll find out, of anti-Semitism. And, you know, I actually, from a theological standpoint, don't agree with a lot of evangelicals on some things when it comes to eschatology. But the one thing that we all agree on is that Israel is our best ally in the Middle East. They are a force for overwhelmingly good in a very unstable and dangerous region. They've been a longtime friend of the United States, and we should support them. And love or hate President Trump, the man supported Israel. And there's some concerns. So we're going to talk about that. And you are invited to be a part of the conversation. If you haven't followed or subscribed, it's a good time to hit that button. And obviously a great time to hit share right now as we jump into this conversation. Charles Mizrahi, great to have you on Life Today Live.
Oh, thanks for having me, Randy. I'm looking forward to it.
All right. So I said my perception is that anti-Semitism is on the rise. Is it? Am I just tuning into it? Has it always been here, or what do you see going on in our country right now?
Well, there's two things. One, it's always been here, and it really never disappeared anywhere. There always is a simmering, irrational hatred towards Jews throughout the world, different countries, different levels, different times. And don't get me wrong, not everybody hates Jews, but there are areas of the world, for example, the Muslim world now, and where Jew hatred, anti-Semitism is rampant. The troubling thing that we're seeing now is in the United States is a rise of anti-Semitism, which now has reached a level that seems to be acceptable. That one could be anti-Zionist, but say, well, I have Jewish friends. You can't be against the state of Israel and say you have Jewish friends. There is only one country in the world, one Jewish country in the world, out of 190 plus or 215 territories and countries throughout the world. There's only one homeland for the Jewish people. And to say you hate that homeland, but you still like the people is really a disconnect. So that's definitely not true. But there is a growing trend of anti-Semitism openly in the United States, and it is extremely, extremely troubling.
Now, I think the ones we all know, those of us that follow it, would be, Representative. I always butcher her name. Ohan Ilmar, is that right?
Right, Elon Omar.
Elon
Yes.
Omar. See, I told you I always butcher the name. I could even have it right in front of me, and I would butcher the name. So my apologies to that. I mean, no disrespect, but she's not the only one. But she's really said some things that are disturbing from someone in government to be saying. Is that just a reflection of what's going on in the country? Is that an aberration? What do you see with the people in the Senate or in the House who are saying some really radically anti-Semitic things?
I think it's appalling. It's absolutely appalling. You have anti-Semitism on the left and the extreme left and the extreme right, and I'll get to the extreme right in a second. But Congresswoman Elon Omar, is an enigma in the sense that she's still able to be part of Congress. She's still able to say what she says and be protected by the Democrats. And she still serves as a member of the House Foreign Affairs Committee, which is just astonishing to me. Here is a person who recently tweeted and put in the same sentence the United States, Israel, Hamas, the Taliban in terms of war crimes. Yeah. And she serves on the House Foreign Affairs Committee and wasn't censored, wasn't told to remove from her position, and was defended. And she is out anti-Zionist and anti-Semitic, which is extremely, extremely troubling.
And that's another thing I don't understand, because if, you know, okay, it's one thing for someone to say something that's out of line, and maybe make a correction. She actually doubled down, from what I saw, on her assertions. Um, but for the rest of the people to not do anything, that makes me really question where they're at. And there was another former congresswoman who said some things very recently, and again, I'm tired. I've had a long week, and I don't remember her name, but she came out and said some very strong things against Israel, and just kind of baseless things, frankly. And nobody's calling them out. And so I'm going, okay, we know the ones we hear. How many of them are we not hearing because they're smart enough to keep their mouths shut, even though they would love nothing more than to see Israel not exist? Is there a strong undercurrent of unseen anti-Semitism in our government?
I wouldn't say that. I wouldn't say that, and
Okay.
that's not the case. We're seeing here the progressives, the squad, if you will, and their ilk, who have this progressive way of thinking, which makes zero sense. They're violently against, verbally against, in such a terrible way, against the state of Israel, which is a democracy, which is the freest place for any Arabs in the Middle East. They have more rights in Israel, Arabs do, than anywhere else. They're full citizens. In fact, recently, Israel just formed a new government. It's a parliamentary system. And for the first time ever, the Arab Party was part of the coalition. So all those fools who keep talking about apartheid, which is just absolutely just a big lie. Here you have members, Israeli Arabs, part of the government.
Hmm.
So when you hear such hatred from the progressives, especially the progressives who are for gay rights, what would happen in Palestine, in Gaza, in other Arab countries? Gays have no rights. They swing from wires hooked onto cranes, and they're hanged. In the Palestinian territory, it's a 10-year penalty, incarceration, jail term. So all the progressives, for all of their caring about, and every time you see any type of prejudice, they're at the forefront. But when it comes to hatred of Israel and hatred of Jews, it's open season.
You mentioned the rights that they do have, and I think a lot of Americans don't realize this. It's taken some people explaining it to me for me to even realize it, because you don't think about it. But you talk about the Palestinians, which I'm not quite sure how that's defined. But when Israel was formed in 1948, some people were displaced, and their descendants are around today. You're saying what I've heard other people say, which is that they are actually welcome to be a part of Israel. It's not some sort of a racially pure type of country. What you even make the case that they have more freedoms in Israel. Arabs have more freedoms in Israel than they do in many of the other Arab countries. Why is this not known and celebrated and held up as a great thing? Instead, it's paraded around as, oh, they're just being oppressed.
Anti-Semitism, it's hatred. Nothing more, nothing less. Because if you look at it on a piece of paper, and I didn't put Israel at the top, and showed you that 2 to 3, Israel's around 7 to 9 million people. 2 million or so are Israeli Arabs, which have full citizenship. There is nothing in the Constitution, in the Declaration of Israel, that has anything in terms of discrimination against them. They are part of society. They sit as Supreme Court justices. They run businesses. Many of them serve in the army, the Israeli army. They are members of parliament. They vote. There are mixed cities with Jews and Arabs living side by side. So I don't know what this great lie, or this big lie, is all about, but it's there.
Yeah, it is. Is Iran rather behind a lot of the problems, you think?
Iran is behind Hamas, and which is supporting them to destroy Israel from Gaza, which people don't also realize that Gaza is not part of Israel anymore. Israel gave Gaza back, which they won in the Six-Day War in 1967 from Egypt. Gaza was part of Egypt. After the Six-Day War, when Israel was attacked on all sides, and even from countries like Iran, like Iraq, that had no border with Israel, they sent troops in order to destroy the Jewish state. In 6 days, nothing short of a miracle and the grace of God, Israel was able to not only push back against these Arab nations, but also expand their borders, give them some breathing room. Right after, at Khartoum in Sudan, the Arab League said the three no's: no negotiations, no peace, and no recognition. Israel wanted to give back Gaza. Egypt did not want to accept it. In 2005, Ariel Sharon, Prime Minister of Israel, displaced Israeli citizens who went to Gaza and made the desert bloom and built greenhouses. Displaced them. It was heart-wrenching watching Israeli soldiers rip out people from their homes, Israeli Jews who lived there and built a flourishing community in order to have peace with the Arabs. In 2005, it was all theirs. They gave them greenhouses, even to continue the businesses they were doing, selling flowers to Europe and throughout the world. And what's the first thing they did? They dismantled them and turned them into rockets in order to attack Israel. And the Palestinians and Arabs living in Gaza, they voted in Hamas, a terrorist organization. And since then, for the past 16 or so years, they've been trying to destroy Israel. So that's where Iran fits in. Iran is supporting that. But no, it's not specifically Iran. Hamas wants to see Jews throughout the world killed, Palestinians the same, and Iran is planning and trying to build extremely difficult. They're working their tail off to build a nuclear bomb to do one thing, and that's to drop it on the state of Israel and annihilate every man, woman, and child in the state of Israel.
Do you think the Biden administration is going to help them achieve that end? Not necessarily directly, but by their policies?
I pray not. And so far, all the criticism about President Joe Biden, and he's been a friend of Israel for the past 40 years or so, he has stood up against the progressives during the Hamas war just recently. And Israel, he was Israel's friend. The United States has no greater friend than the state of Israel, and the state of Israel has no greater friend than the United States. I hope that President Biden will continue to do the right thing and realize the folly of trying to make any type of agreement with Iran, which has one intent, and that's to build a nuclear bomb in order to kill Israelis. And the thing which is so troubling is that of the 190 plus countries that are in the United Nations, there is only one country that speaks for the total destruction of a member state and still is allowed to exist as a member, and that's Iran. How is that possible?
Yeah, I've heard it said, I think Dennis Prager said it, that if you disarm the Arabs in the region, you have peace. If you disarm the Israelis, you have a genocide.
That's right.
And
That's right.
that kind of encapsulates really, I think, the whole situation. We're talking to Charles Mizrahi. I want to show you his website. This is it, charlesmizrahi.com. There you can reach all sorts of things about him, but I want to point out specifically that podcast right there. He's got some great guests on the Charles Mizrahi Show, a lot of good in-depth thinking persons, kind of roster of guests. So if you really want to dive into any of these, look at that. Alan Dershowitz on free speech. Whoa, man, I'm going to have to listen to that one. Okay. So it's not just the investment stuff, but I want to ask you a little more about Israel and what you're seeing going on. But real quick, can I sneak in some financial questions for you since this is your background? And I got the frozen response. We'll see if he comes back. So our guest, Charles Mizrahi, hopefully will dial back into the Zoom and we will follow up this conversation. I want to go back to right here. He's got the Alpha Investor, and he was a hedge fund manager. Right now he's coming to us from New Jersey, but he's also he's raised in Brooklyn. That's the accent you're hearing. but he's really got a lot of great insight on the financial stuff. So if that's an area that interests you, I would urge you checking that out as well. He was also telling me about some of his recent conversations. Governor Huckabee he talked to, I don't see it here. Peter Schiff on the financial stuff. You can see he's got a great mix of topics here. Penny stocks, I mean that's if you're into that's a whole other interesting one. But he's also covering, he's got Alan West, a great individual there, talking about the issue of race relations and things like that. So there's a lot of great, this is just kind of great one to dial up and tune into. You can get them on Apple Podcasts. And then this one here on the 1619 Project, which really is the foundation of a lot of the critical race theory, kind of it's in that vein of what we're seeing. We're teaching young people in America to hate America. Pretty bad deal. I want to say this about the Israel topic as I'm waiting to see if we can get Charles Mizrahi back. Um, we have a lot of Christians in the evangelical community who support Israel for uh, their eschatological reasons. In other words, the idea that we need to rebuild the temple and that Jesus will come back in Jerusalem. I don't ascribe to those. I think though that wherever your sort of religious ideology is at, because let's face it, Judaism doesn't agree with Christianity, denies Christ as the Messiah, and so there's a fundamental disagreement in the same way that there's a fundamental disagreement between Muslims in the region and Israelis. But what we're seeing is people from all faith backgrounds in Israel living side by side, getting along. That's the model we have to hold up. We have to pursue. And if you look at the countries that are around that are threatening Israel the most, they're just the opposite. So just from a very fundamental ideological basis of tolerance, of peace, Israel is by far the best example, one of the best examples in the world, and the only real example, although there are some positive things I think going on in other countries, and I want to ask our guest about that. Charles Mizrahi, you back with us?
Yeah, I don't know what happened. Forgive me. I think it was some type of internet snafu.
Yep, it
Sorry
was.
about that.
It was. And so I was hitting a couple things I want to go back to on the Israel thing, but could I ask you some financial questions real quick?
Sure, go right ahead.
Okay. Um, let's be honest. President Trump sent out tons of money to people during the COVID thing. And I think the one conservative criticism of Trump, despite his roster of achievements of kept promises, was the national debt. Let's face it, it's not gotten smaller. Now President Biden is continuing to send out money to people, expanding programs and various things. And I get it, people are hurting. I'm not, it's a tough situation. I'm not here to jump on one party or another. My question is, are we really heading for some massive inflation? We're already seeing, wood prices, I know, are up hugely if you're trying to build. I mean, there's a whole ripple effect, right? We've got books. My book is supposed to be out this week. It's behind because of some production issues, and the cost of paper has gone up. Are we set for some massive inflation here very soon?
Well, you bring up an excellent question. Never before in history, in United States history, has there been so much money thrown into a system, and we never also ever had a situation with a pandemic like this, where the economy was shut down. The stimulus at a certain point was a good thing, but too much of a good thing, apologies to Mae West, who said it's wonderful, it really isn't in this case. Too much money is sloshing around the system, and it's causing inflation, which basically means inflation is very simple. It means too much money chasing too few goods. Now you have the worst of both worlds here. You have too few goods because during COVID, the supply lines were cut.
Yep.
We weren't able to bring in supplies. Now you have people getting unemployment checks, getting government handouts, stimulus, which really that's what it is. not going to work. Why aren't they
Right.
working? Because they can make more sitting home collecting unemployment
Yep.
than working. So businesses have to now pay more for workers. That causes a rise in price. Who's going to pay that? They're going to start upping their price. So you look at what's happening. Look at the auto industry. The Wall Street Journal today had a piece where car prices are going 10%, sometimes even more above their sticker price, simply because there aren't enough cars, because cars need semiconductors. During COVID, the supply lines were cut. Now they need them. Now they're willing to pay any price. Prices rising, and people have more money. Never before had Americans had so much money in the bank. And we're seeing that huge amount of money just sitting there and bidding up prices, especially in housing.
Yeah, and yeah, I just sold my house and bought a house in the last month and a half, and it's crazy, crazy out there. Also, the same situation with the car. Here's my question for the average person: how do we protect ourselves against it? Do we keep money in the bank? Because it looks like it's just losing value sitting in the bank. Is there a better place to put it? Is that the stock market? Is that real estate? I mean, what in the world does a person do to not lose everything by not doing anything?
Well, first off, 2022 midterm elections, we need to elect people who understand this. So first place we have to look is the source of the problem, is we have to have a Congress that is more of the values and understanding and more connected with the American people than what we have now. So the biggest thing Americans could do is vote in 2022, and we need to elect people that understand the situation. So right there, if we don't do that, we're going to have another 2 to 3 more years of just agony.
Hmm.
Number two, what should the average investor do? Uh, Same thing, anytime you have high inflation, you always want to be invested in companies, in businesses, because owning a stock is really owning a piece of a business. That's really what a stock is. You want to own pieces of a business or stocks of companies that can continue to raise their prices along with inflation and don't have huge inventories. So Microsoft, it just comes to mind. Their business is booming. The cloud business, they don't. It's not like a steel plant or a clothing store, which has to have inventory and has to keep paying more and more money for it. So that's the best protection over the long term for any type of inflation, is to invest in companies that are able to increase their prices and don't have large inventories.
What's your take on
Rat
cryptocurrencies?
poison, rat
Rat,
poison.
really?
Avoid at all costs.
Why do you say that?
What is it? What is it? You take a computer and you throw some code in there and you produce money? We've seen really what Bitcoin's been used for. It's used for ransomware. It's used for sex trafficking. It's used for armaments. I don't want my money in something that can go up or down 30% a day. And to call it money is a joke. It's a delusion. At the end of the day, what is a Bitcoin? Can I spend it? Can I touch it? Can I feel it? If I just look at a Bitcoin, it just sits there. I don't even know what I'm looking at. I don't understand it, and I've yet in the past 5, 6 years had anyone explain to me what the intrinsic value of Bitcoin is, to know if $30,000 is a high price or low price. No idea. If, for example, this iPhone, we know what the intrinsic value of the iPhone is. We know more or less $700, $800. So if someone came to us and said they want to buy this for $10,000, I'd be more than glad to sell it to them. But if someone said, would you want to buy one of these for $10,000? There's no way. I know what these things are worth. What's a Bitcoin worth?
Hmm.
Don't know.
I don't know. I'd love to find out, but I can't find the blockchain from many, many years ago. I think I bought a little bit, but I'm not 100% sure. I may be a millionaire and don't know it. And then again, a week from now, I could be completely broke, and it wouldn't
Yeah,
matter because
right.
right. Okay, back to Israel, and because what I was wanting to pick up on when we lost the connection there. It seems like some positive things are actually going on in the region with countries that once wanted to destroy Israel are now going, okay, you know what? Maybe it's better to make nice and we can live peaceably over here and prosper instead of constantly being in war and wasting our resources on these other things. Are you seeing some positive developments in other countries around Israel?
No matter what anyone says about President Trump, he understood foreign relations. He understood the importance of Israel, and he did the right thing. First off, he moved the embassy, although presidents in the past 30 years have talked about it.
Hmm.
He moved Israel's embassy from Tel Aviv, which is not Israel's capital, to Jerusalem, which, as your audience and yourself know the Bible, that was David's capital, King David's capital 3,000 years ago. So there's no dispute on that. Israel is the capital of Israel. Jerusalem is the capital of Israel. Okay, so President Trump did that, and no, there's going to be an uproar. The Middle East is going to. What happened? Silence. I happened to be in Israel at that time, and I had friends texting me, "What's happening?" There was nothing going on. It was. You went to breakfast, everything was great. You had coffee. It was just a proud moment. And by the way, since then, I believe 3 or 4 countries have started to move their embassies to Jerusalem.
Nice.
That's number one. Number two, the Abraham Accords. The Abraham Accords, started by President son-in-law Jared Kushner, basically showed so far 4 nations have signed, UAE, Bahrain, Morocco, and Sudan, peace treaties with Israel, and UAE, United Arab Emirates, just traded ambassadors with Israel. So these countries realized that you get more by having peace with Israel than working for its destruction. The Palestinians is not the issue anymore, and that's what this shows. The Palestinians have been offered a state for maybe 20 times since 1937, and every single time they rejected it. They rejected it every single time. Just most recently in 2006, they rejected it. So these countries realized you get more by being a partner with Israel than you do being an enemy. And I just want to point out one point, because we both have the same mutual friend, Governor Mike Huckabee.
Yeah.
A few weeks ago, during the Hamas war, Governor Huckabee and I were in Florida. We were sitting together at lunch. And I want to tell you, this man is a beautiful man, both inside and out. He sat with his phone, and he's sitting next to me. And every few seconds, he's getting a text. And I'm looking, and he keeps looking at the phone, and he's doing this. And I said, Governor, what are you looking at? You got so many texts. And he goes, no, I have this app called Red Alert. And it's an Israeli app that basically signals when a missile is shot from Gaza. And he shows me, because these are all the missiles that were just shot in the last 10 minutes. Now, I have my daughter and my grandchildren living there, and I didn't have this app, and he was, and his heart was hurting. So someone at lunch brought up and said, but the cycle of violence. And the governor put down his fork and said, there's no cycle, there's no equanimity here. You have a terrorist state trying to kill Israeli civilians by shooting missiles from places protected by children and in hospitals and schools. That's where they're shooting from. And their objective is to kill as many civilians as possible. And Governor Huckabee said, look what the Abraham Accords did. It showed that you can have peace with countries that now have to understand and should see Israel doesn't have any desire to go to war with them. They just want peace. And you brought up a beautiful point before. I think you mentioned Dennis Prager saying it. If Israel will lay down its arms tomorrow, there'd be no Israel. If the Arabs lay down their arms tomorrow, there'd be nothing. It would be that simple.
There'd be
so
peace.
There is peace. There is peace on its way. Arab nations are now seeing that Israel, first of all, is an economic dynamo. Startup nation. Waze, for example, that we use on our phones, which was bought by Google, that was an Israeli company. Mobileye, which Intel bought, which is using for autonomous driving, that's an Israeli company. Warren Buffett, the first company, the Oracle of Omaha, Warren Buffett ever bought outside the United States was an Israeli company. So the technology's there, the people are there, the labor force, it just is brilliant and hardworking. And this is a country in a very, very bad neighborhood. Yeah. Can you imagine the blessings that Israel could give the world that they're giving now? But imagine if there's peace, the blessings they would be able to give their Arab neighbors, and making the deserts bloom like they have, providing agricultural techniques and computers and technology in order to raise the standard of living throughout the whole Middle East. It would just be a miracle.
Oh, no doubt. And there's a little anecdotal example, I think, of what we should understand in our relationship with Israel. Right now, in Florida, at the site of that terrible building collapse, Israeli Defense Forces came over to help try to find people, try to save lives. And Governor DeSantis offered them free hotel rooms, which is great. They turned them down so they could sleep in tents on the site of the accident so they could do more work and spend less time going back and forth to a nice hotel. They're sleeping in tents. These are friends that you want to have, whether you're Arab or American or whatever. So what's going on, some of the anti-Semitism that's going on is just really disgusting, and it's wrong. And really there couldn't be any more moral clarity than the fact that being friends with Israel, being peaceful is the right thing, and anything else to try to destroy them is the wrong thing. To me, that's as clear as can be. Charles Mizrahi, thank you for being with us. Anything you would like to add before I let you go?
Yeah, just one point, and that's you touched on it, and I couldn't have said it any better. The Israel Defense Force. Remember, so the Israel Defense Force is to defend the country, not to be an aggressor. The Israel Defense Forces has a special unit that, at a moment's notice of calamity anywhere in the world, they send a team, which is, I don't know how many of people, but there are doctors, nurses to set up camps, engineers. Anywhere there's calamity in the world. When they went to Haiti during the earthquake, they just were amazed. Other nations were amazed at the operations Israel's able to put down on the ground and the technology they're using now to find people. So when you're looking at a country that just wants to live in peace, that has a population that wants to do good for the rest of the world, that wants to share their technology with the rest of the world, that wants to increase the standard of living, that is really a biblical prophecy coming true after 2,000 years, as the prophets said, they will return. And the Jews have returned to the land. And to hate Jewish people simply because they believe in Judaism, and to hate a democratic state which is bringing up the level of the average person in an area which there are fanatics who are looking to kill. Mm-hmm. And here you have being on the right side or on the wrong side, and there is no other way to look at it. You have to have a moral compass here, and I hope your listeners, I'm sure many of them do, and I'm sure all of them do, and I hope all of them do, realize that there is no better friend to the United States than Israel, and Israel has no better partner than the United States. And that's something that should continue to be a bipartisan issue.
I agree, Charles Mizrahi. I agree 100%, and we should appreciate that. And there seems to be so little appreciation for Israel's support of our country. So come on, people. And you know what? I think it goes back to one thing you touched on earlier, and that's the ballot box. That's where the average person, everybody watching, can go, okay, who is going to stand with Israel and vote for that person? Don't vote for the other guy. And it doesn't matter. I don't care if it's an R, a D, an I after the name. Just don't support anybody who's not going to support our democratic friends in the Middle East. It's a bad neighborhood, but there's one shining light, and let's stand up and let's support them. Woo, what a good one. We could go on for a while, but I won't. Thanks again for being with us. I appreciate you.
Oh, my pleasure. Thanks so much for having me.
All right, you guys, I gave you the tour of his website, so you can go listen to some more great conversations with his podcast. And hit share, hit subscribe, hit follow if you haven't already. Check out, if you're an investment type, check out the Alpha Investor. Very much worth your time. And come back. We got more great guests all week right here on Life Today. So I look forward to seeing you guys tomorrow and the next day and the next day. And we'll keep the conversation going. Appreciate you hanging out. We'll see you next time here on Life Today Live.
To make America a better nation. All we say to America, be true to what you said on paper.